Today we're going to talk about a little known secret on Google Earth that really helps out bass anglers. Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Well, this week we are back in studio today because I have something really interesting that I think you're going to find is very helpful, not only for your home waters, but especially when you take a fishing trip sometime this summer. Now, when we're talking about finding fish, we're often talking about using some sort of search bait or tactic. The Power Shot rig is a great way to do that, and I will go ahead and mention that video at the end, so make sure that you stay tuned. Google Earth has long been a valuable tool for bass anglers at the professional level, all the way down to recreational weekend anglers. But there's a little tool that's kind of hidden in there that not everybody knows about, and it helps us to really decipher some important information, and that is called the historical imagery section of Google Earth. So before I talk about the three ways that I use it, we need to understand where it's located and how to access it. So if you go ahead and pull up your Google Earth application, whether it's on your desktop or your phone or tablet, whatever it might be, go ahead and open up Google Earth. I use it on the desktop because it's a little bit easier to manipulate. And look down in the lower left-hand section after you have already zoomed into whatever body of water you want to check out. So down in that lower left-hand corner, there should be a super small box that has a date in it. If you do not see that box, what you want to do is go ahead to the upper right-hand side and hit the plus button and start to zoom in. When you get in close enough, that is when that small box will show up. So if you see that box on there with that date, go ahead and click on it. When you click on that box, then straight up above at the top of the screen, a slider is going to show up. It's going to look pretty opaque until you go ahead and put the mouse cursor up on top of that slider. Once you do, this is your historical imagery slider. So all the way to the right is the most recent satellite image that you're looking at, and all the way to the left will go back, in some cases clear back to the mid 90s. So that is how you access the historical imagery. So now that you know how to get there, let's talk about the three ways that I find it most helpful. The first is when I'm fishing river systems. Now, specifically smaller river systems, because if you've got clearer water, this definitely helps out. It's more difficult on larger river systems where the water is dirtier or more turbid. So if you're fishing a smaller river system, this first way is just an excellent research tool. So if you take a look at this particular small river here, this is an image from several years ago, and then this is the most recent image. And if you look right on the bend of this river, you can see that the hole that the current has dug out has increased by almost double in the last few years. Now, as an angler, when you're on the shoreline or you're in your boat and you're basically at ground level, it's really difficult to kind of get the big picture of what's going on. I've been fishing this particular bend thinking that the drop-off or the cut was right about in the middle. I didn't realize it had worked so far over to the bank, because often in this section of the river, because the current really picks up, it gets a little bit dirtier sometimes, especially if we've had some recent rain. So the next time that I fish this small river, I will know that this ledge, this break, this drop-off is farther towards that outside bend, and that will definitely help me narrow down where the smallmouth are positioning in this key spot of this small river system. So historical imagery taught me something that I did not know had happened on this particular river. The second way that I like to use the historical imagery is when I'm trying to decide and break down the type of structure underneath weed beds and vegetation. Take a look at this image right here, and we can see that this is in May. And then if you look at this other image, it happened to be taken in a different year, but only 2 months down the calendar. So June, July, whatever it says up here in the corner. Look at the size of this weed bed. In May, when it's just starting to grow, it's not all that big. And 2 months later, it is huge. So how is that helpful to us? Well, this is a relatively small area of this lake. It's not always going to show up on a topographical map in the detail that we're looking for. But I know because of where this vegetation started to grow in the spring, this most likely is the highest point up here on this flat. Then as the weeds grow throughout the spring and into the summertime, they keep moving farther and farther into a little bit deeper water. But I know by this historical imagery that this particular piece of structure where the high point is, that is very valuable information to understand how the lake bed is formed underneath that vegetation, because come midsummer, it all looks the same. It looks completely flat. We're not always aware of depth and contour changes underneath that weed bed. So using the Google Earth historical imagery to tell us that information is really, really helpful, not only for your own home waters, but like I said earlier, if you're taking off on a fishing trip, it's good information to have, because the topographical maps that we use on our graphs, or even if you've got an old paper map, may not go into that tight of detail. So that's the second way that I use it. Now, the third way is very interesting, especially if your home waters, if you have an impoundment, a reservoir that floods quite a bit. It's used for flood control. They'll hold the water back. This third example I have here is from Grand Lake of the Cherokees over a several year period, and you can see a huge difference in water levels. Now, where this tributary comes in, the small creek dumps in, when the water is down low, it's clearly defined in the satellite image where that creek bed is, that creek channel, how far it extends out into this flat. We can also see other low spots in that flat. And then when we go to the other image where it is flooded or a higher water stage, none of that is super clear. Now, obviously, if I've got a trolling motor up there with a transducer on the bottom, I can kind of figure this out as I'm fishing through the area. But by studying this historical imagery, I know exactly where the low spots are in this flat. Those are going to be migration routes. As that water starts to fall, eventually those bass are going to pull into those little deeper channels right away as they head back out to the more traditional shoreline. So once again, this is an example where a regular topo map is not going to show you the information in this much detail. And we know at the mouths of creek channels that sedimentation occurs and they're constantly changing all the time. But the historical imagery photos here on Google Earth makes it very clear the contours and where those little deeper channels or migration routes are going to be. So that is the third way that I like to use Google Earth's historical imagery. Well, I hope that this video helped you out quite a bit as far as how to use the historical imagery section. And as I mentioned earlier, power shotting is a great way to find and locate fish in the late spring and summer when you can still use a drop shot setup and present the lure in a finesse manner. But with the power shot rig, you can cover a lot of water quickly. So go ahead and click on this video here if you are interested. And don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.